Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey, welcome to the show. That was the beginning, right? It was a strangely subdued little beep I heard in my ear. Hey, how you doing? It's a Wednesday, December 16th. All just sitting here waiting for the snow to start. I see a few meandering little flakes showing themselves outside my window. So I want to begin on a different note today. I find the present and the news often pretty stultifying, depressing. So I want to go back a little bit. For some reason, in my omnivorous kind of reading that I do day in and day out, I keep seeing pieces about women and their lives. And these are extraordinary women who I don't know about. And I've been thinking more and more about how, again, history and mythology, the stories we tell ourselves, how our histories have removed so many of the people who were so consequential and important, but they aren't acknowledged, aren't known, aren't credited because they were not men. And this, of course, is the same complaint that any person of color would have looking at history, too. Make no mistake, our history, what we know, is a history of white Christian men. And the world is so much bigger than that. And when you think of the fact that Black and brown people and women have lived in this man's world forever, and yet have managed to do extraordinary things despite the fact that they are not given the kind of credit or value that a man would have, a man who might be exalted for something that a Black woman would not be acknowledged one whit about. This is a story that plays out over and over and over again. And so I just want to start with a few things that have come across my eyes in the last few days about just some of these women. You may have seen that today is the anniversary of Ludwig van Beethoven's birth, 250 years ago. Beethoven, arguably one of the great composers of all time, especially given the fact that he was losing his hearing throughout much of the time he was creating masterpieces. And then even with his hearing gone, it's pretty astonishing. I want to instead turn from him to a woman who was described as probably his best friend. A woman was Beethoven, who was a cantankerous soul, was his best friend. But she was more than that. Her name was Nannette Streicher. She was born in Germany in 1769. Her father was a piano maker. And at the age of 8, she played in front of a man who had also, at the age of 8 and even earlier, been lauded for his piano work. At the age of 8, Nannette played for Mozart, who grumbled about her posture, but said that she had genius. She ended up taking over her father's business at the age of 23 as a young wife and mother. 23 years old, she takes over a business and changed the way the pianos were made. She wanted to create a different tone. And Beethoven went berserk with her instrument. He was blown away. And so this is the woman who made the pianos that Beethoven, the only pianos he would play on. Who would know? She was a mother. She buried some of her children. She's running a large business. She's changing the very nature of what the piano is. And get this, if this isn't classic sexism at work. Here's a woman doing things that no woman was supposed to be doing. And Beethoven, besides wanting her to produce the pianos, the only pianos he would play, said to her, I want you to manage my house. She had her own house. But she agreed. She took care of his laundry. She mended his socks. She bought his groceries. All of this is noted because he would send her letters of what he wanted done. And he was paranoid. He thought everyone else was out to poison him. And she was the only person he trusted. So, by assuming control of his chaotic, slightly nuts household, she freed him up. And it was during this period that he composed some of his most ambitious piano sonatas. Anyway, who knew? I never heard of her. The thought that a woman would be running a factory that made pianos in the early 1800s, but was still expected, of course, not only to care for her house, her children, her husband, but to take Ludwig van Beethoven on as well. And we don't know her name. Nannette Streicher. And we don't know her name because scholars and historians who specialized in telling us about Beethoven were all men. And they just couldn't get it through their heads that an 18th century woman could build a piano, let alone create a brand of piano, let alone becoming the helpmate that Beethoven so desperately needed. She has been written out of much of that history. So there's one woman. You know, might not seem like a big deal, but amplify it over and over and over and over again. And then go, as I said, beyond women. Go to anyone who's not a white male Christian. We don't honor them. We don't even know them. And it brings me to my obituary of the day. Lydia Menapace. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Menapace. There, I got it. Menapace. I took 1 year of Italian in school, so Menapace. Lydia Menapace. She died last week at the age of 96, but what a life. She smuggled explosives under her skirts in the Italian countryside as a member of the resistance. She delivered maps and anti-fascist propaganda. She stored bombs in her family's basement. She organized jailbreaks. She was 19 years old. She shepherded escaping Jews to the Swiss border. She did it all, brought medicine on her bicycle to partisans who were wounded and hiding in the mountains. She did whatever the need required. She risked her life constantly. Lydia Menapace. And when the war was finally won, they told her she couldn't march in the liberation parade that was organized by the resistance, even though she had been a major part of that effort. She was told she couldn't march because she was a woman. And so immediately after all of her heroics, her contribution and the contribution of other women were buried. Were discarded, were not acknowledged, because somehow it took away from what the men had accomplished. She marched anyway. And after fighting fascists, she turned to fighting sexists. Before there was even a name for it. She exposed the efforts to erase the roles that women had played as partisans. In a book she wrote, she said the chiefs of the resistance preferred that their power and leadership were not shared with women. They took everything: credit, power, and historical memory. And there it is again. I keep seeing it. I keep coming upon it. How the credit, the power, and the history that then is thought to be truth is created by fragile white men, and the indispensable role of all the others are thrown into the ash can of history. She later became a senator in the Italian Senate, very late in life. And here's a quote from an interview she did in April. What did I learn from the resistance? To live with fear and overcome it. Man, I got to tell you, I'm going to write that down, because that is what we all must do now. To live with fear and overcome it. Okay? These amazing words. She was 96 years old, had a lifetime of experience to know that. And it's how she lived. And now, for the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say it, she was quoted in the Italian newspaper La Repubblica with what I just said. What did I learn from the resistance? To live with fear and overcome it. And then she said, and now let us get rid of this virus. It was the virus that took her life. On December 7th, Lydia Menapace. Oh, man, to live with fear and overcome it. If I did needlepoint, I would do a pillow or a little hanging. Live with fear and overcome it. If I was into tattoos, I would have it tattooed on my arm so I would see it all the time. Live with fear and overcome it. There was a story in the paper today about a woman who couldn't anymore live with fear. And so she cut and ran. And I am not going to second guess her. Her name is Joyce Warshaw. She was, until yesterday, the mayor of Dodge City, which we all know from countless histories of the West. God knows how apocryphal all those histories are. She was the mayor of Dodge City, Kansas. And she was attempting to institute a mandate that the city commission had voted that everyone in town must wear masks indoors. Obviously not in their own homes, but indoors. You had to have a mask on. And she had been subjected to so much abuse and threats that she quit yesterday. She said that she couldn't live with that level of threat and fear. So chalk one up for the bullies, the cowards and bullies that sent her all the anonymous messages that told her to burn in hell, that told her we're coming for you. And she said they were loud and they were aggressive and they frightened me and my family. She had been a public servant almost her entire life. She said, there's a strong part of me that wants to say they're only words, but people are so angry right now. And I don't know that for sure. Yeah, she's right. They are only words until just one person decides to act. And you think of all the ones spewing words now, and there's more than one person that will likely act. Just as one guy here 2 years ago walked into that synagogue a few blocks from where I sit right now and blew away wonderful people praying. I don't fault her for not being able to live with this fear and to overcome it. But man, we're going to have to start because it's going nowhere. There was a story in the Washington Post today that I couldn't even believe. I mean, I couldn't reading it. I couldn't even take it in. And that is something that is happening more and more and more, of course. It's an experience that we're all having more and more and more because so many in our country have literally gone insane, okay? Let's just call it what it is. There are crazy people on the loose all over the place, and a lot of them are carrying guns. And they think you are the enemy, I am the enemy. And they are whipped up into a lather. So did you hear this one? An air conditioning repairman was driving his air conditioning repairman truck in Houston when he got rear-ended by a black SUV. He got out of his truck, and the driver of the SUV jumped out of his vehicle and pointed a gun at the air conditioner repairman's head. The driver, he called police, the SUV guy, as he held a gun to this guy's head as he forced him onto the ground and kept a knee in his back, calling the cops and telling him, I will kill you if you move. When the police arrived, the SUV driver said, you want to arrest this man? I've done a citizen's arrest. You want to arrest him because he is part of a vast election fraud scheme. And there are about 750,000 fake ballots stuffed inside his truck. Now, understand, this happened before the election. This happened in October, okay? There's a terrified air conditioner repairman face down on the pavement, and the guy holding him there has called the police. What I didn't tell you is the truck was not there when the cops came, because the guy who made the citizen's arrest and called the police had accomplices in his SUV who had jumped in the air conditioning guy's truck and took off with it to secure these almost million false ballots. Needless to say, it was all ridiculous. The truck was full of nothing but air conditioning parts. And this gunman who did the citizen's arrest was a former captain in the Houston Police Department who was now in the employ of a right-wing lunatic organization called Liberty Center for God and Country. Just another wonderful neo-fascist, out-of-its-mind group funded by Republican mega donors. Do you know what they paid this ex-cop to ferret out this unbelievable crime? They paid him over $250,000. The Liberty Center for God and Country. They gave this cop $266,400. First, they told him what was happening. Then they told him to prove it. Somehow he happened upon this air conditioning truck and decided that this is where the election was being stolen. The guy ex-cop, and his friends told the police, "We are investigating a voter fraud conspiracy, and it's operated by this guy, supposedly the air conditioning guy." He said that they'd been surveilling his house, the AC guy's house, for 4 days, and they knew he had hundreds of thousands of fraudulent ballots in his house and in his truck. And you know what else they knew? They said he was using Hispanic children to sign the ballots because their fingerprints would not appear in any databases. This guy told the cop he summoned, who was obviously a little flummoxed, "I just hope you're a patriot." Needless to say, the police found absolutely no evidence of voter fraud or anything after the poor air conditioner repairman said, "Yeah, you can look in my truck, you can look in my house. No Hispanic little kids, no ballots." Wow. So there you have it. Just some of what is going on in your country. it's like, if kids misbehave, like the father might say to the mother, "Your children." Yeah, I'm disavowing anything having to do with this country right now. Your country this is happening in, and it's just one. I mean, this is just one. So obviously, the ex-cop is now is going to go on trial for what he did. He's posted a bond of $30,000. I guess he's going to be back in court tomorrow. This is just constant insanity. People have lost their minds. Oh, I lost my mind too, because you know what I forgot? I forgot that I'm being joined by the news editor of Pittsburgh City paper, Ryan Deto. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Lynn.
Hey, how you doing? Huh?
Doing okay. I said thanks for having me on. Yeah.
What was that last thing you said? Why am I having trouble hearing you?
I was just saying thanks for having me on again.
Oh, okay. You need to enunciate. Have I told you that before?
This is a problem with my entire family. I'm sorry.
What do you mean, your entire family mumbles, or you?
Oh yeah.
You're a bunch of mumblers?
We're a bunch of mumblers who don't shut up.
Well, I come from a family of people who don't shut up either, but I would say only my brother mumbles.
I see. Well, obviously you don't mumble because you're a professional
That's right.
speaker and
I learned
television personality. Yes.
Yes, I learned to enunciate. So,
well,
anyway,
I'm a writer, so I don't do any of that.
Oh gosh. Well, listen, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. I'm choosing not to look at it much today.
That's a good idea.
For my sanity. And I thought we'd turn to you to bring us up to date on some of what's going on in town, some of which I have talked about myself. I've certainly talked. You've got a big piece out today on Michael Fuoco.
I do, yes.
The former, he's former a lot of things now, right? Former head of the newspaper guild at the PG, former instructor at Point Park and University of Pittsburgh, former police. Didn't he cover
reporter?
The police? Police reporter at the Post-Gazette.
Yes, he did for like a decade.
Yeah, former lots of things, but he has been unmasked as a serial sexual harasser.
Yes.
And it's an interesting story, and I thought, well, what could you add to it? Since the New York Times didn't you find that surprising? That the New York Times found that story to be worthy of almost a full page of reporting? What do you think brought that on?
Well, I know the reporter who works at the Times, so I didn't find it as surprising because I knew the story was coming. But well,
why did he think that this was worthy of the paper of record?
Yeah, honestly, I think he thought it was worthy because he's a media reporter, so he covers media, and because this was this involved a media personality in the form of Fuoco and a labor issue with the guild that represents the journalists at the at the Post-Gazette. But I think also it really was just like, from what I've heard, I've been reporting here 6 years, 5 or 6 years. This whole Fuoco situation was like kind of a big open secret. And I think it really was just like waiting for somebody to kind of take the lid off of it. And
but what's interesting, isn't that interesting though? It was an open secret certainly at the paper and maybe at these educational institutions.
Yeah.
And this the paper is a journalistic organ. The institutions were asking him to teach journalism. Journalists are not supposed to keep open secrets. It's particularly bizarre.
It is, and I really think it is it's a Me Too story. It's really one of those things where it's like, well, why wasn't this talked about? But I mean, I'm 34, so I don't remember as much like what it was like in the 2000s. I was like a teenager, but I just think that's from what I've heard from all the people that I spoke to for my story is that it just wasn't really talked about. And like women did come forward and they did, make complaints, but they didn't file official complaints. But like, did anyone really file official complaints? Did they just believe that they would go nowhere? Also, are we expecting 22-year-olds to file official complaints? When they're probably scared
against a complaint against a powerful, a powerful, much more senior mentor.
Right. And like, and I think people need to understand the context too, that like during this time of the 2000s and even the and even the 2010s, Foucault was a star in terms of his journalistic ability. He had won multiple awards for articles he'd written. He was kind of considered one of the better enterprise reporters at the Post-Gazette, which was a massive paper at that time. And it's still large, but it was massive then. Like 400 people on staff, I heard at the time. I mean, that's huge. And so he was really considered one of the like more looked up to reporters, in this town. And so, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of his power, and I think it's a combination that America just wasn't really coming forward with these stories and taking it seriously, because these stories always had been coming forward. Like if you look at Bill Clinton, right? These things were always coming forward, but people weren't necessarily taking them with the same seriousness or the same or applying the same accountability that people are trying to do now, if that makes sense.
And I mean, I felt like I had to take a shower after reading your piece.
It was
he is so repulsive in the piece. I mean, the grooming, the going after these young girls. He seems to particularly like 22-year-olds. And I mean, this is when he's in his 60s, right? And he takes
them in 60s,
and he takes them to bars to tell them ostensibly how to get ahead in journal, just classic. Let me show you my etchings, moves in on them, uses everything he can, flattery, the possibility of helping them in their careers, drugs, cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, all of that. He's doing this not just with one at a time. He's got more than one. He's also got a wife, a fellow reporter. Is that marriage still together, by the way?
I haven't found anything that said that it isn't. So I don't. I mean,
You're
it might
kidding.
not be, but yeah, I mean,
she always wrote about pets?
Yeah,
she wrote about animals.
One of the more shocking things that I found was really just this Point Park story that came. I mean, this Point Park Globe story, student newspaper story that came out in 2010. That quoted his wife talking about him for a profile after he was hired as an adjunct. And it was like, but from all the reporting I did was that like Foucault had been, accused several times over, before this. He had already had a child with one of, the students he had gotten in a relationship with.
Right.
And, he was taken to, court over those,
right. For
over
support.
that. So,
right.
So like, it did appear that his wife knew and was okay with it, and it's really in the same way that I think people were gonna struggle reading it, is that it was hard to write. Like it was just obviously not nearly as hard as any of the women that came forward and talked to me. They're just so brave and really just like I really commend them. A lot of them came on the record too, which I thought was,
I know it is,
especially,
and I want to say when I was reading it, there were times when I, as a woman, who experienced this kind of crap in my career, before there was any name for it. The even concept of sexual harassment was not even, so, it was just a field day for men then, with, young, lovely women being let out of their constraints and allowed for the first time into the workforce in ways that they never had. And my God, what some of us old ladies endured, being sort of in the first phalanx, is it brought back so much. I even still have. I kept letters. I kept one I have of my freshman English teacher, who handed back a paper I'd written, and he had scrawled on the backs of it. It's like 7 pages of this crazed thing coming at me, and then insisting that I meet him at a certain place, that he had to set me straight, and blah, blah, blah. And this was just constant, that a kid, I was 18 years old, would be set upon by a man with great power over me. And there was no sense in my head that it was even wrong. So at least these women have the knowledge that this is not right, which gives them some power.
Well, I think what's so interesting about this story is that the women that really appeared to come forward and or even the other people that helped, lodge complaints against them, is that these were women that were, essentially in relationships with Floko. So they basically got to know and understand over the years that he was abusing them, mentally. And so that's when they finally realized. So I can't even fathom potentially how many women that were just like the last person I spoke to for my story, Emily Petsko, who was given too many drinks and basically refused his advances, but felt obviously felt harassed and come upon by Floko. I can't even imagine how many women potentially that there are like that with Floko, and maybe even a lot of other men. I don't know. You can't even understand, because there were a lot of people who were warned about Floko, and it was an informal complaint. It was from someone like that, but they knew, they had an idea, and it was just like, oh, well, okay, we can't really do anything. It's like, no, we have to do something. Just talk to these women. Talk to these college-educated women. One of the most striking quotes from my story was one of the women who ended up getting a relationship with Floko. She was 22. She was impressible. She wanted to become a successful journalist, which is a really hard field to become a, success in. And she said, I was in a relationship with Mike and I thought I loved him, but if someone would have talked to me, if an adult would have spoken to me about it, I don't know what I would have said, is basically what she said. And so we have to do something. We have to do something.
So Brian, who were the adults that failed all these young women? Let's just go to, we know at the newspaper, obviously, from both fellow employees and, the guild, the management of the Post-Gazette. But what about the universities, Point Park and Pitt?
So everything kind of started at Point Park, technically. So Mike was invited to speak to a class at Point Park sometime in the early 2000, 2001 or 2002. And there is where he kind of started to put his moves on students. And he, that's kind of, I guess, where he got his start with the universities. He hit on women at a bar. He tried to buy people drinks. He did all these other things. Ended up getting in a relationship with a woman from from that kind of first encounter. Then he was hired, but so no warnings yet. But then he was hired at Pitt, and so he's hired as an adjunct at Pitt, and he was then started juggling multiple women, right? And eventually, somebody, from what my reporting shows, that multiple people reached out to Pitt. There was a student who I spoke to, a former student who I spoke to. He was the boyfriend of one of the students that ended up getting in a relationship with Fuoco that she left him for, basically. So she brought up, he went to the university and made a complaint and said Fuoco is manipulative and he's giving these students drugs, basically. So there was one person there. The university did not confirm who that was, and the student that I spoke to couldn't remember exactly who he reached out to, because this was in 2002. And so there was that. But then I spoke to the then head of the English department, and he said he received another complaint from someone else that wasn't a student. So that's at least two people. Then Pitt said they got two complaints. So that could have been those two complaints, but they said that it's a little confusing that, two complaints weren't from students. So there's potentially three complaints that were given to Pitt. And so eventually my sources said that he was let go from Pitt. Pitt didn't confirm that, so he might have just quit. I have no idea. That he was let go from Pitt. This was in the mid 2000s, basically around like 2005, 2000, like that area. So he got three complaints against him. He was either let go and or resigned from his adjunct job at Pitt. But then in 2010, he was rehired by Point Park. And so this is really where the story is like, where is the communication between these things? If you have a professor who is allegedly getting into manipulative relationships with students and giving them drugs, wouldn't you want to tell every other university in the state, possibly, at least in the region, that, hey, this guy, there's something iffy about him. We don't have solid evidence or blah blah blah. But you might just want to think about that.
It's just really it's amazing.
And so
it's just amazing.
Right. And then so he's hired at Point Park. A student, a former student, then lodged a complaint to Point Park, and they actually respond pretty quickly to it, and and this is in 2011, and then they don't renew his contract, right? So they don't fire him, right?
No,
they just don't renew his contract, which is like the easiest thing to do, because like adjunct professors have like no union rights. And like,
that's right, and it leaves no real record. You just,
right.
That's it.
Exactly.
Right.
There's no record as well.
Right, right.
After that, one of the Point Park students is interning with Mike at the PG. Why didn't they tell the PG, Lynn? I don't understand how Point Park can't have said, hey, just FYI, we didn't renew Mike's contract because he had an allegation of inappropriate behavior with students and sexual misconduct against him. Just wanted to let you know, Post-Gazette, because he still works there.
Isn't that the woman that became pregnant? No, that's not the. Who can take? No. I can't keep track, but I thought.
But it's, right.
So, do you think that the Point Park at this point doesn't give a damn except to shield itself from any civil liability that might be coming its way, right?
Yeah, I assume so. Obviously there's no requirements to report other people, because these are all adults, right? It's not the Sandusky law or anything like that. Obviously, this happened to all. Man. All this is being revealed, post that law anyway. And so we obviously in Pennsylvania have incredibly strict now, requirements for minors. And in schools and in libraries and all these other, situations. But, what I was, really kind of thinking about, and what someone said to me for the story, was that, like, there's got to be some kind of communication between universities, has to be something. If you're letting an adjunct like Fuoco just kind of go around and, like, potentially use his power to, get into sexual relationships with students, that's just, what do? You have to do something. Something, Lynn. Like, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I want to leave this particularly awful man abusing his power to go to another, and that is this Pittsburgh cop whose name, just because I've been in news in this city for a long time, the name of Paul Abel seems to me to have constantly popped up in the last 20 years or so, maybe even more. Tell me about this guy who we still don't know if he's fired or not. This is a Pittsburgh police officer.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry. I just pulled out for a second there. Yes, Paul Abel is a Pittsburgh police officer. He's had dozens, potentially maybe more, complaints filed against him for his behavior. He was once charged with assault that for using his weapon as a pistol whip that he hit somebody with, and then the gun went off and actually hit someone in the leg, I think, or non-fatally. But those charges were dropped, and he was let back onto the force. And then this summer, he arrested someone in Squirrel Hill outside the farmers market because someone was asking about his mask, which was a Blue Lives Matter mask, which is a pro-police movement, which has actually been co-opted by extremists in our country. And he ended up throwing that person to the ground, shouting at him. This is all caught on tape. And he was being investigated for that incident. And then WPXI recently reported that Abel was recently off the job, apparently for another encounter with a homeless person, potentially. And they the TV station was reporting that he'll likely be fired, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. But
the list on this guy is it over the years. I mean, this clearly was a rogue cop who has enjoyed constant employment. What does it take? He has to kill someone, I guess. And even then you don't know because you end up back on the force.
Yes, it takes an incredible amount because of the arbitration clause that exists for police officers. Police officers are not allowed to go on strike in the state of Pennsylvania. And so in lieu of that union right, they have this arbitration ability when they are disciplined.
And for some reason, arbitrators always seem to find for the cop. What is that about?
It does feel that way. It does seem almost impossible. It's kind of incredible that after the pistol whip situation, even if he wasn't technically charged, that's not maybe something, because he was off duty. He wasn't even on duty when he did that. And there's just so many complaints. You would think that this is it, and maybe Paul is now fired, but at the same time, well, I don't know what arbitration is going to bring up.
Exactly.
So it's just one of those situations where, have you ever seen the movie Waiting for Superman, Lynn? It's a movie about teachers. It was a movie. Yeah, it's about schools. Yeah. It's a really big movie. I watched it, and sometime in the 2000s. In hindsight, I realized it's a very anti-union movie because it just drags the teachers' unions as these terrible people, and it has this phrase called "Dance of the Lemons" that it coins, where basically bad teachers can't get fired because of the union, so they just dance around to other schools. And I'm wondering why that phrase hasn't been applied to police officers.
To the police,
because it seems like the same exact situation.
Well, but we have a case
are killing people and abusing people, whereas
police officers are killing people and abusing people and abusing their power. And Michael Fuoco, another guy in a position of power, doing all that, and nothing happens.
Right.
And the victims just keep piling up. So I noted, and speaking of the police, that, it's budget time. And the city council voted to take, millions of dollars out of the, and this is out of what Peduto was wanting to give them.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Yes, it's a little complicated, but so basically the city council decided to shift $5.3 million away from the police into public safety, which is kind of the same department anyway, but to this Stop the Violence fund. But, it's a little confusing. It is technically away from the police department, so it doesn't give them the broad ability to use that fund. but the Stop the Violence Fund is really just a community policing initiative. So it's kind of taking it away from the police, but it's also not totally
not really
away from them, if that makes sense. And also to say that, $5 million is not that much. It's about 5% decrease, whereas advocates were calling for 50%, which is obviously very large, but still, it's not huge. Or anything.
And is there any indication that the mayor will, not go along with this?
No, I believe that he will sign it. I think I'm not sure about the vote for the shift in the police funding, but the vote for another shift of funding was unanimous. So even if he doesn't go along with it, they can't beat a majority. So
the other thing I want to talk to, the other thing I want to get in here is what the hell is going on with the administration of the Allegheny County Jail, which is, if I'm reading correctly, is hell on earth.
Right.
What in the name of God is going on? Is the warden, Harper, that, incapable of doing the job? Or is he lacking the funds to do his job? I mean, the last thing I read about was how almost the medical staff there, people stay for like a day or two and say, I'm getting the hell out of here. I can't do my job. So there's these poor prisoners, most of whom do need
inmates.
Inmates. Mental health care, all this kind of stuff. They're getting nothing. And this while they're all in solitary confinement, essentially, because of the pandemic.
COVID, right. Yeah.
Okay, so what the hell?
Try to get in this quick. Healthcare problems at the jail have been a long-term problem. But 5 years ago they had, or maybe even 6 or 7 years ago, they hired a private contractor to take that over, Horizon Health. That was a total disaster. They ended up having to short that contract. Then they brought it in-house with help from Allegheny Health Network to do it. But obviously, not all those problems are being solved at all. It sounds like it's
it sounds understaffed. Like there's nowhere near the kind of.
And honestly, Lynn, that might be the next bigger story. And I gotta say, Public Source has been really leading the way on this coverage. So if people are interested in that, I would lead them to them. They've been really doing enough.
Public Source, really great stories, right.
And it might be that they might need more funds for it, because the jail does have a pretty large population for our area. I think it's usually around like 2,000 to 2,500 people. I should also want to just note, and this isn't, I'm not trying to belittle the problems at the jail, because they're numerous and they need to be addressed. But jails and prisons are not the same thing. Just for your listeners, that jails are where you are accused of a crime or charged with a crime, and then either if you can't make bail or if you don't have a bail because it's a violent crime, which they usually don't assign bails to, then you are in the jail. And usually the average stay of people in the jail is about a week, and then sometimes much longer. Sometimes people are in there for a year or two, which is like a very long
year
time.
or two before they've been convicted.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think people do understand that. That place is filled with people who have not been convicted.
Right, correct. And
poor people who can't make bail. Rich people make bail.
Right, exactly. And this is a huge problem. This is why, no cash bail reform has been such a huge talking point on the criminal justice side. And there's a lot of magistrate judges up this year for election. So I'm going to be writing about this later, but people really need to think about who they're going to vote for magistrate court this year, 2021, or next year, 2021.
These guys have incredible power. Yeah,
because if you don't give someone cash bail, if you say no cash bail, just come to your next court case, they're not going to go to the jail. And so that's huge. That is huge. That's how you really lower the jail population. But anyway, the healthcare problems are terrible. The mental health has always been inadequate at the jail, and it seems like that is even more the case now. And you're talking about poor people who are convicted of crimes and are usually have mental health issues.
Right.
Problems and all these other
I've
issues.
got
So they
mental health
need
issues, and
access.
I'm convicted of a crime. I could be. I could have been convicted of marijuana my entire life, but I'm a white person, so no problem.
Right. And I just think that, you really bring up a, really big point. Maybe it is more money. Maybe it is more attention. I think that's what the advocates are doing a pretty darn good job at, is kind of showing that it's like, hey, maybe we do need to pay more attention to this issue. I think it is going to be interesting how, the county at large and its voters and conservative voters really think about this issue. But maybe there is a consensus here to be like, we do need to put more money into the jail to help solve some of these problems, to keep less people out of jail, which will have a bigger, broader effect to help solve these problems.
Right. Yeah. Whoa. Well, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I really appreciate it, and bringing up these issues is really important. So I'm really happy to reach
Okay.
out.
Well, you keep up the good work, and I hope someday to see you again.
I do too. We're gonna have to celebrate.
I know. Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Lynn.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye. Okay, guys. That'd be it for me. And I will be back tomorrow. I'm looking at the snow, and unlike most people, I want lots of it because I really don't have to navigate it. But it makes everything so much prettier, doesn't it? Anyway, whatever. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.